The Talmud says the world stands on three pillars: on Torah, on service, and on kindness. As humanity begins to recover from a catastrophic year, there is new hope for a brighter future of world peace and prosperity. Partners in Torah of Cleveland is proud to present Pillars of Faith, Building a Better World. This epic virtual event will take place on Sunday, April 25th at 6:30 p.m., and it will kick off our massive 33-hour, $300,000 fundraising campaign. I am Rabbi Pinchas Landis, Director of Partners in Torah of Cleveland, and I will be hosting special guest, His Excellency Yusuf Al Otaiba, Ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to the United States of America, and Malcolm Hoenlein, Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. Both of these illustrious icons have spent decades working towards sustainable peace in the Middle East. And now, with the landmark signing of the Abraham Accords, it looks like that dream will become a reality. I am so excited to kick off our annual campaign and invite you to join me for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity as our featured guests discuss the rocky road to peace, the future of the Abraham Accords, and what we, as a community, can do to help build a better future. And it's all happening on Sunday, April 25th. Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you all for being here tonight for another night of Partners with Rabbi Landis for the Jewish Destiny series. I am your host, Rabbi Pinchas Landis, and just to echo the words of that wonderful little trailer we just saw, in case you decided not to listen until I came on the screen, this Sunday will be the Partners in Torah annual event. Considering the world's circumstances, it will be a virtual event, but nonetheless, it will be an amazing event because we have two illustrious speakers, Yosef Al Otaiba, the United Arab Emirates Ambassador to the United States of America, and Malcolm Hoenlein, whose official title is the Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. But that really doesn't sell who he is if you're not familiar with him. Malcolm Hoenlein was truly, they refer to him as the president's president. He's actually semi-retired now. That's why he's now the vice chairman. But he ran this organization that was the umbrella organization for all major Jewish organizations here in America. And he has worked tirelessly for years on peace in the Middle East, visiting different Middle Eastern countries, both clandestinely and officially. And he is actually very close friends with the ambassador. They're very good friends after many years of working together. Again, not necessarily in the public eye, but now that the fact that they can, so to speak, come out with their friendship, they have enjoyed that position and are really looking forward to this conversation on Sunday. So I hope you'll join us. That will kick off at 6:30 p.m. The link is right here in the chat box. Or you've probably already gotten multiple emails from me with that link in it. And if you haven't, then don't worry, you will. And I look forward to seeing y'all there. So just one more very important point is this is our main fundraising campaign for the year. We try our hardest to be a once a year ask organization. In other words, we try not to always be in the fundraising mode. We try to do it just once a year, one campaign, and this is that campaign. So we'll be raising, God willing, $300,000 in the course of Sunday's campaign. We have 33 hours to do it. We're starting the campaign officially kicks off 12 p.m. on Sunday and officially ends 9 p.m. Monday evening. But don't worry, if you want to get that link now, we're already accepting the donations. But this is what keeps us going and doing amazing programs like you're experiencing. So please join us on Sunday, participate in the campaign, and looking forward to it. With no further ado, let's dive right into this evening's topic. And we are continuing the Jewish Destiny series, continuing from where we left off. You know, as we said in the first lecture, that the goal, or really, I think we focused on more last week, the goal of this program is to cover the 6,000 years of Jewish history over the course of however many weeks it takes. Well, considering that last week we only did 5.5 days, it is going to take us some time here, right? If we go at this pace, then every week we only cover about 5.5 days of history, it's going to take us a while. But as we said last week, that 5.5 days was really probably, from different accounts, several billion years. And this week we will also cover a good amount of traction, a good amount of time, hopefully. So with no further ado, we're diving into part 3. It's not good to be alone. Adam and Eve, picking up on the 6th day of creation. So at its very core, when we look at the order of creation, which, as we, whatever you say about the science of Torah, the science in Torah and juxtaposing that was what we talked about last week. But one thing is for certain, that the order of creation is pretty spot on with what modern scientists say. And the very last thing that was created was woman, right? Man was the second last thing, and woman was the last thing. As many people like to often point out, that the creation went in gradations of greatness as you went from one to the other. So, my wife likes to remind me about this all the time, that women were created after men, meaning women are greater than men. And I don't argue with her. I just don't argue with my wife. It's not smart. As they say, the reason that a groom breaks the glass under the chuppah is because that is the last time he will ever put his foot down. So I try to remember that in my household. But be it as it may, the last 2 steps in creation were man and woman, created on the 6th day. Now, there is a fundamental difference between Judaism and other major world religions, most notably Christianity. And I apologize, I forgot to give you guys the outline. We do have an outline for tonight, as with previous nights. So let me throw that in the chat box quickly here. And it's coming right now. So one of the major differences, or there's many major differences, but vis-a-vis this topic, a major difference between us and our Christian cousins is that Christianity believes that mankind was born in a state of sin. They refer to it as the original sin, and therefore mankind is inherently or innately evil, and it's the purpose of mankind to try and remove that evilness. And they really couldn't do a good job with that until their savior Yashka came along to do it for them. Right? That sums up Christianity. Like, we were taking weeks and weeks and years to explain Judaism. That's Christianity in 15 seconds. But we have a totally different perspective on the creation of man. Because when we look at the story of the creation of man, where are we? We are in a place that is we colloquially refer to it as Gan Eden, which translates as the Garden of Eden. As we're going to see, it is more precisely that a garden that was outside of Eden, and we'll discuss that and see exactly what that means. But be it as it may, as we take it apart and try to understand it, it is definitely some sort of paradise on earth, some sort of synthesis of the spiritual and the physical. And it shows that quite the opposite of what our cousins say is that we say man was born into essentially perfection, that mankind was born into a perfect world. And yes, we did some things to screw it up, as we're going to see, but we were not, God forbid, born in sin. That every time a baby is born with a blank slate, perfectly flawless, with nothing. Now, again, I'm not going to get into if somebody won the uterine lottery or did not, but at least at its core, vis-a-vis the heavenly courts, vis-a-vis their position in this world, it is a blank slate, and they have their whole lifetime to write their story. There's not like recovering from a deficit of sin, God forbid. That's not how we look at it, and we see that right in the story of the Garden of Eden. So, what happened in the first day? Because as we mentioned before, that when we talk about counting time, we don't start counting time as we know it until man opens his eyes, until the first man, Adam Arishon, Adam, opens his eyes. And that was 5,781 years ago, roughly. And as we said last week, which lines up with many of the viewpoints of sociology, of anthropology, the study of civilizations. And because we see Adam and Eve are created as a complete civilized human being, they start having civilized conversations and civilized interactions, and that is what we see. So the Talmud describes what this day looked like. And like, you think your days are busy, you think your days are jam-packed, wait till you see what this first day of man's life was like. So the Talmud says, it's number 2 in your outline here if you're following along, that Rav Yochanan teaches that there's 12 hours to a day. By the way, that's still a very Jewish concept, that every single day on the Jewish calendar has 12 hours in it, 12 hours of daylight. Now you might say, well, 1 second, it depends on like the equinox and the solstice and where the moon is, and I'm sorry, where the sun is and all these different things. Yeah, but every day still has 12 hours. We just call those in a rabbinical sense, we refer to them as Shah Zmanios, which means halachic hours. When we talk about a halachic, a Jewish hour is 1/12 of daylight. So today, where we're not so far off from the equinox, the days, the hours are roughly 60-minute hours, give or take. But when you get to the dead of the summer, those hours are more like 75-minute hours, and in the dead of the winter, they're more like 45-minute hours. So that's a perspective here. We always divide a day into 12 portions. So this first day of mankind, the Talmud tells us that the day is 12 hours, and what happened every single hour of the day. So it says that on the very first hour of the day, the dust that Adam was created from was gathered together. And the second hour, the figure was fashioned. And the third hour, the limbs were extended. The fourth hour, the soul was cast into the body. The fifth hour, he stood up on his legs. The sixth hour, he called out the names, meaning of the animals. The Torah tells us he identified all the animals and gave them their names. The seventh hour, he was paired with Eve. The eighth hour, the two went up to a bed and four came down. We'll explain that momentarily. The ninth hour, he was commanded not to eat from the tree. The 10th hour, he and she transgressed. The 11th hour, they were judged. And the 12th hour, they were expelled from the garden. As the verse in Psalm says, but man abides not in his honor, meaning that mankind did not even spend one full day in the Garden of Eden. If we count the day maybe from when the soul was cast into his body and became a full human, so maybe it was whatever it is there, 7 to 8 hours he had in the Garden of Eden, and that was it. And then he was kicked out, spends the first Shabbos outside of the garden. And this is what we're going to take apart tonight, essentially these 12 hours and what they were all about. So as we said last week, it's hard for us to understand exactly where mankind came from. The Torah does not give us very much knowledge or very much of an understanding. The Talmud, we see, expounds on it slightly, but not in depth. And even if we look at if we open up a Chumash, if we open up the Torah and read the exact verse that describes the creation of man, again, not much more detail, or actually far less detail than what we just said. It says over here that Vira Elokim es Adam, that God created man, but Salmo, but Selam Elokim, and his image, and the image of God. I'm sorry, that's not what I was looking for. Forgive for not marking my verses beforehand. Here we go. I'm sorry. It's what we refer to as the second creation story. There's actually two different stories of creation in Bereshis. And it says over here, this is the second chapter, Genesis, verse 7. It says, "V'yitzar Hashem Elokim es ha'adam," that God formed man, offer min adama, from the dust of the earth. V'ipach ba'apo nishmas chaim. He breathed into him the soul of life. V'hi adam lenefesh chaya. And then Adam became a human living being. So all we're really told about the creation of man is that man is made essentially of two parts. Mankind is half God and half dirt, right? That's basically what we see over here. We see that mankind is half God and half dirt. Now, what does that mean that we're half God and half dirt? Because all we saw over here is that when God created man, what did he do? He formed our bodies, and he formed out of the dust of the earth, and he breathed into that form a nishmas chayim, a living soul, which we understand is a piece of Elokai Mimal, a piece of the Almighty himself that is inside every single human being. So that means that a human being is basically half God and and half dirt. Or another way we could say this is we are really two parts. A human being is both body and soul. When we talk about a human, there are two different parts. There's our physical body. That's what we all see. That's what we use to get around. And then there is what we call our neshama. There is our soul that is the spiritual division of us. It's really if the way that our sages, and especially the Bali Musar, the Bali Machshava, the Kabbalists explain it, is that the soul is the real us. In other words, who we are is not the physical body, it's the soul inside of us. The way that, I was privileged to be raised on many different intellectual endeavors and intellectual works. One of those was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And if you ever saw the TV show, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you know that the bad guy in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a nefarious character by the name of Brain. Now, Brain was basically a brain. He was a big blob and nothing else. He didn't have a body. He was just a brain. And the way that he got around is he had like this robot that they put the brain inside the robot, and he'd use these like joysticks to get around. That's a very Jewish concept, because really that is what our body is. Our body is essentially the shell of our souls, but the soul is real us. But we really have a daily challenge. And we're going to be talking about this from the beginning of mankind, from this very first day of mankind. And that is that these two parts of us are meant to have synergy, are meant to be aligned with one another, but they're not always aligned with one another, because quite often the body wants physical pursuit and the soul wants spiritual pursuit. And sometimes that can be in tandem, and sometimes that is in conflict. And therefore, when conflict arises in this regard, we essentially have a decision to make. The decision we have to make is, are we God or are we dirt? In other words, are we going to play to our spiritual side and be a part of the living God, or are we going to play to our physical side and be dirt? So for those of you who participated in the 10 Steps program, you probably remember Rabbi Orlovsky, and he wanted to tell the story that when he was working in youth group work, he shared a story at a certain Shabbaton, a certain retreat. And it was this idea. And a few years later, there were some guys who were known as ruffians. They were troublemakers, and they ended up becoming like religious guys and went off to yeshiva. And Rabbi Orlovsky met them, and he said, what happened to you guys? You were probably the last guys in our group of NCSYers that we thought would ever become religious. Like, what happened to you? And so one of them says to Rabbi Orlovsky, says, Rabbi, I remember you were giving that talk once where you said that we were created in a way that we are half God and half dirt. And I went home and I looked in the mirror and I said, am I God or am I dirt? Am I God or am I dirt? I'm not dirt. Right? By process of elimination, I must be God, right? I must be a spiritual being. And that's what started this person off. So that's the decision we have to make on a daily basis. We have to make the decision to be God, in other words, to be godly people, because we were created B'Tselem Elohim in the image of the Almighty, and we have to play into that image as a spiritual image, and our bodies are here to help us achieve that, and it shouldn't be vice versa. And that's what we see from the little bit we are told of the creation of mankind. Now, there's a concept that our sages speak of, and it's called Nahama de Kasufa, which means the bread of shame. Now, what is the bread of shame? The best way to understand this is I was recently listening to an interview on the Tony Robbins podcast of Evander Holyfield. For those of you who are from Atlanta, Georgia, you know that we are not a sports city by any way, shape, or form, similar to Cleveland. And we have a very limited number of championships to show for ourselves. And so therefore, they tout things like the fact that Evander Holyfield was from Atlanta, and he was at one point the heavyweight champion of the world. And that's somehow considered a city championship. But okay, if you don't have much to count, you count that. So I grew up with it being an Evander Holyfield fan. And, as far as boxers go, he is a somewhat upstanding guy, in more ways than one. Again, he's about half an ear less than the man he used to be, but still nonetheless a pretty respectable guy. So Evander Holyfield at one point was heavyweight champion of the world, very wealthy guy. And like happens to many athletes that don't have financial education, he lost it all. He lost every penny he had, and now at the age of 60-something, he's rebuilt enough, to live on, but he definitely doesn't have the millions that he once had. And by the way, speaking about his missing ear, Mike Tyson is the exact same story. Mike Tyson was the wealthiest athlete in the world at one point, and lost all of it, went to jail, and and we know what happened to Mike. And but again, I'll tell you, it's an interesting comeback story just as a human being, is realizing his shortcomings and growing. You can Google him afterwards and see what he's up to. But still, this is what happens to many athletes, that they're given these millions of dollars for doing what they love, for participating in the sport. And by the way, I just to say a little bit off topic here, I am of the opinion that athletes deserve every penny they get. I know many people think I'm crazy, but I believe they deserve every penny they get. Why? Because sports is a business, and the business generates a ton of money, and that money is generated because of their talents. So now you want to question in America how much money is spent on sports? Okay, I agree with you on that. Too much money is spent on sports. But once the money is being spent on sports, the one who the fans are coming for and spending the money for are the athletes. They don't know who the owners are half the times. So I am of the opinion that athletes deserve every penny they get. But again, without the financial education, they often lose it all very quickly. And along these lines, there's been a number of documentaries that have been made about lottery winners. And we all know that one of the worst curses in the world is to win the lottery. Now, it's not really a curse. What happens is the lottery is often won by people who are dumb enough to buy lottery tickets, right? Again, I'm not insulting anyone here if you like to buy lottery tickets, but my dad can tell you the probability that you have a much better chance of being struck by lightning than winning the lottery. And I once heard I once read in a financial book, they made the calculations that the people who spend money on lottery tickets, if they would just take those, $5, $10, $20, $30, $40 a week, or whatever they spend on lottery tickets, and put it into something like a Vanguard 500 index fund or something like that, how much money they would have after 20 or 30 years. And it was staggering. But be it as it may, we all know what happens to people who win the lottery. They typically blow it and their lives are ruined, and they find out who the real enemies are, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Because that's what our sages refer to, where Moshe Chaim Luzzatto and others refer to as Nahama de Kasufa. It's the bread of shame. Meaning, what does a person appreciate more? They appreciate something that they worked for or something that was given to them. Obviously, something they work for. I mean, let's take our athletes, not to say they didn't work hard, or our lottery winners, which is even a better example. They didn't do anything for this money, and therefore, easy come, easy go. Will you let them go? Ich will not, right? It's easy come, easy go. They don't have the financial education. They didn't work for it. It wasn't blood, sweat, and tears. And so too, you see this quite often in multi-generational businesses, that the parental figure who built the business, is very frugal and careful with the money of the business, and lives a meager life, often doesn't live a life to the standard that the business has generated. I know, one example that I always think of with this is Ramindy Klein, our founder, who built his beautiful business and now left it to his children, and he lived a very modest life, and that's often what we see. But a lot of times, and again, it's not the case with the example I gave, but a lot of times the kids they didn't schwitz for the business, and therefore they blow money left and right. So that's what our sages say is Nahama de Kasufa, bread of shame. In other words, when you're given something, you don't appreciate it as much as if you worked for it. Now, no one knew this better than the Almighty, and therefore, when he created Adam and Eve, he wanted, and really Adam and Eve representing all of mankind. When he created all of our forefathers, all of us, he wanted to give us the most perfect life possible. He wanted to give us the most benevolent, beautiful life possible, and therefore he wanted us to live in paradise. And that's what the Garden of Eden was, as we'll describe a little bit more in depth in a moment. But what is that ultimate paradise? If it's just given to him as a handout, or if he worked for it? So obviously the answer is the latter, as we just explained, that when you work for it, that's when you truly appreciate it. And therefore, in an effort to avoid this concept, if you will, of Nahama de Kasufa, this situation of the bread of shame, Adam and Eve had to earn their place in the Garden of Eden. Now, how are they going to earn their place? They had to show that they wanted to have a relationship with the Almighty. And therefore, just like as we've explained numerous times, we'll explain even more as we go on in our different series, that the way that we have a relationship with the Almighty is through the mitzvos, through the commandments that he gives us. The commandments are there for us to form a relationship, because every relationship comes with the I have tos, and these are the I have tos in our relationship with the Almighty. And a relationship with the Almighty is the most beautiful life of bliss that was trying to be given over to them. But it was a lot easier for them. They were given a total of 1 commandment. Now, you and I are given 613. Now, as we know, not all 613 apply to every single Jew, unless you are both male and female. A Kohen, Levi, and Yisrael live both inside and outside the land of Israel at the same point, and are both married and divorced, right? That's the only way you can fulfill all 613 commandments. But be it as may, Adam and Eve, they got 1 commandment, right? The 1 commandment is, don't eat from what is referred to in Hebrew as the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra. Don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the Torah says that because if you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. Okay, that's what we see on the surface. Now, what happens next? In enters stage right or left, maybe, the Nachash, the serpent. Now, on the surface, the story of the serpent looks like straight up fairy tales. I mean, just think about it. You have a serpent who's enticing Eve, Chava, to eat from the tree, and there's like a whole conversation, and like you start to think about like when you would go to the zoo, or when that reptile guy would come to your preschool, and how you would, if you were afraid of reptiles, you'd run away, and if you wanted to, like me, I want to show you're a tough guy, you ran up and petted the snake, even though you were really like shaking to the knees. But that's what we think of when we think of the reptile. So like this is just a fairy tale. Now that reptile is having a conversation and interacting with Eve and all this stuff. This is a book of fairy tales. So as usual, when things don't make sense in the Torah, we have to look at what our sages say, and we have to take apart the words of the Torah to try and understand what was going on here. So the introduction of the Nachash, of the serpent, says, Haya aru mikol chayas hasadeh, that he was the most cunning of all of the animals in the field. Now, the way that our sages understand this is that that cunningness, that ability to be arumim, to be cunning, is a extremely high level of function. So what we see from this serpent is that he not only had the ability to speak and interact with humans, but he also had the ability to be cunning of humans, which is an even higher level than speaking. And our sages go on to say that when it says this, Arum Mikol Chayos Hasadeh, that was a way of saying that after mankind, the Nachash, the serpents, were like the next creature down. So if we would take a survey and ask what are as far as functionality and as far as human-like characteristics, what's the next animal down, what's the next creation down after mankind, we might say, like, I don't know, the orangutan or the ape or some type of ape. As one of my teachers used to say, the only thing that separates us from the apes is the ability to speak, and the fact that we can do this, right? The fact that we have a moving thumb, which the apes don't have. I don't know if I think all of the I think the whole family does not have movable thumbs, but opposable thumb it's actually called. But anyways, so after the orangutan, before the human being in the Garden of Eden, there was the snake, the Nachash. The Nachash walked, it had limbs, it talked, it could interact, it had a conversation. Now, it didn't have a soul. So the way some of our sages go as far to say is the serpent was like a human, but with no soul. Now, I'm sure we've met some humans like this before, right? I'm sure we've all met humans like this that we think are more like serpents than humans and don't have much of a soul. And they look like humans, but they don't have a soul. That was the serpent, right? That was what the serpent was. So we have to get sort of the fairy tales out of our head. There was a snake slithering around trying to, or like all the old art renditions go, they show a snake hanging off of a tree trying to entice. No, this is something that looked like me and you, could communicate like me and you, but didn't have a soul like me and you. That's what our sages say. Now, what did he want with Adam and Chava? Like what was he messing around with? Was he just such a nasty snake that like he wanted to trip him up? So the answer is twofold. The answer is, on one hand, the Nachash, the serpent, was what we refer to now as the Yetzer Hara, as the evil inclination. In other words, there's the existence of life, the situation in the world that we have now, where our internal conscious is something inside of every one of us. In other words, I always said that the ones who got it right were those great theologians of our generation, the Looney Tunes, that when they would want to show a conflict of, I don't know, Sylvester, if he should eat Tweety or not, they would show like the red Sylvester on one shoulder saying, yeah, go eat that delicious looking bird. And then the angel Sylvester over here saying, no, don't eat that cute little bird. And then Sylvester would have to make the choice. Again, was he God or was he dirt, right? Was he going to listen to the red Sylvester or the white Sylvester? And whatever, he'd usually kick away the white one, listen to the red one, and he'd get himself in trouble. That's us. We have inside of us that inclination for good, that inclination to be godly, and the inclination to be earthly, to be dirt. We refer to the inclination to be godly as our Yetzer Tov, our inclination for good, and the inclination to be dirtly, to be earthly, as our Yetzer Hara, our inclination for bad. Our sages tell us that the situation we have now, where that evil inclination is an internal struggle, that in the garden it was an external struggle, and it was represented by this nachash. So the serpent is essentially a manifestation of the evil inclination as it existed in those days. So you imagine, that instead of Sylvester having a white Sylvester and a red Sylvester, he had a white Sylvester and a serpent, right? That's what was going on in the Garden of Eden. This was the evil inclination to entice mankind to sin. So that's the global understanding of what was going on over here. Our sages say some other interesting things, that the serpent wanted to knock off Adam because he was interested in Eve, and maybe not, but that's one of the things that the Midrashim says. But be it as it may, at its very surface, this was all part of Adam and Chava, of Adam and Eve, earning their place, earning their keep. They were given a commandment. When we're given a commandment, we always have challenges, right? When we want to do something great, everything great, has its challenges. They had their challenges, and unfortunately, they didn't succeed. Unfortunately, they failed. They did not live up to the task, so to speak, and there were cataclysmic, earth-changing results. Okay, we're going to pause here for questions, and then we'll get back to the rest of our outline. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box or speak them out. You can unmute yourself and speak them out. Okay, any questions at this point? Oh, go ahead, Jen.
You said earlier about Adam and Eve having to earn their spot in the Garden of Eden. If they hadn't earned their spot, who else would have been there, since they were the only two people at that point?
Well, I think it's sort of from the other it's from the other extreme. I believe that it's not who else would have been there. It's that we saw it. I mean, we essentially saw the answer to your question, that Adam and Eve did not succeed. And therefore, because they didn't succeed, they were not allowed to stay in the garden. So it's not about who would have been there instead of them. It was about them either being able to earn it or not. And it was mankind. It was what, and we're going to describe a little bit more about what it was in a moment, because I know we're talking about it sort of nebulous to get the facts, but we're going to talk about the it a little bit more in a moment. But it was for all of us, that mankind was supposed to exist in this Garden of Eden existence. In order to do that, we had to earn it. And we, meaning our great grandparents, failed at earning it. So that's so it's not so much who, if not them, it's that they were all of their mankind's representative as the only ones living at that point.
Do you think, though, that, the whole idea that we have free will, but that kind of that the decisions are already made by God. Do you think that was the decision, though, that it was a foregone conclusion that they would have gotten kicked out of the Garden of Eden?
So
because then we wouldn't have, there's all these things that we wouldn't have the opportunity, that there would be a Torah. There would be all of these things that make up Jewish history. And I feel like if they hadn't gotten kicked out, I guess things would have been all sunshine and roses, but nobody really, I don't.
Yeah, again,
a little bit esoteric, but
This is, you know, when we're talking about these points in Jewish history, we very quickly go far beyond my pay grade, because these are really deep Kabbalistic concepts, because we're really delving into the great what ifs of Jewish history. And not only that, but the spiritual what ifs, like what would it look like? And we talk about how the goal of mankind and the goal of mankind is to bring the world back to the Garden of Eden existence. In other words, when we talk about the Messianic era and the completion of the world and the perfecting of the world and all this stuff, that's the Garden of Eden. That's what we're talking. That's what we're going back to. And so essentially, God wanted to create that. That's how we understand this from the Kabbalists. That's what God wanted to create for the world. But in order for mankind to enjoy it in the best possible way, mankind had to earn it, and mankind basically failed at earning it. Okay, let's delve into a few more of these details, and maybe some things will come a little more clear. So, moving on our outline, the first thing the next thing I want to clarify is that, so we all know, the basic story that the serpent got Chava to eat. How did he do it? Because the serpent, as the Medrash tells us, the serpent asked Eve, like what did Adam say to do? And Eve told the serpent, oh, he said not to eat or not to touch the tree, because if you eat or touch a tree, you're going to die. So what did the serpent do? He pushes Eve into the tree, so she touched it and she didn't die. And the serpent says, oh, well, you didn't die from touching it. You won't die from eating it either. And she ate and she didn't die. Now, we're going to take that apart and see what we mean in a moment. But if you look at the commandment was never not to touch the tree. The commandment was not to eat from the tree. So we see from here that what happened was that Adam made a mistake of adding on to the words of the Almighty, and that got him into a little bit of trouble ultimately. But be it as it may, she eats from it, she doesn't die, she entices him to eat from it, and the Almighty finally comes with those fateful words and says, Ayeka, where are you guys? Or as my wife's grandfather would always say, that how do we know that Adam and Eve were German? It's because the Almighty said to him, Ayeka, you're a Yeki. That's like the Yiddish word for a German Jew. So Ayeka, you're a Yeki. Anyhow, old Zadie joke. But before we go down this road, I want to just address the question. I want to make it very, 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 very clear that this is all you learned tonight. You can thank your mother for having you. And that is that the fruit was not an apple. Okay, let's just be clear about that. The fruit was not an apple. That is Christian literature. That's Christian theology. That's how the King James Bible writes it. Nothing to do with anything our sages say. And the Torah itself is just referred to as an eitz hadas, the tree, the fruit of knowledge, or the tree of knowledge, and it's the fruit from the tree of knowledge, and it doesn't tell us what it is. Now, our sages do give a number of examples as to what it is or what it might be. One opinion is that it was wheat. One opinion is that it was grapes. One opinion is that it was figs. One opinion is that it was an esrog. And another opinion is that it was nuts. And each of these different statements of our sages come from a different place. Be it as it may, quite often, especially in homiletics, in Jewish homiletics, when you see so many different opinions and no consensus, it means that we really don't know for sure, right? But no one says it was an apple. Let's just be clear on that. No one says it was an apple. And there's some speculation where the Christian myth of it being an apple comes from. Some say it was based on the translation. So until recent times, the King James Bible was an English translation of a German translation of a Latin translation of a Greek translation that we call the Septuagint, which we know was not accurate, right? The Talmud itself tells us it wasn't accurate. And that Greek translation, what's called the Vulgate, which was the first Greek translation of the Bible, or the main Greek translation of the Bible, which was translated from the Latin translation translated from the Greek, again, based on some Latin Greek words, similar, the word for evil, as in good and evil, is similar to the word for apple, and that's kind of how they got the concept of apple. Either that, or it comes from something from Greek mythology, the story of the golden apples, but be it as it may, not Jewish, okay? Apples, Adam, Eve, not Jewish. Tell the apple juice company they've got to become like a pomegranate juice company, because no Jewish apples at this point, okay? Good, we got that across. Now, so So what happens is we learn so much about human psychology from what happens as soon as they are caught. So first of all, they hear the Almighty, so to speak, coming through the garden and try and hide. Now, like by this point, they haven't figured out you can't hide from the Almighty, right? This is the omnipotent, omniscient God, and somehow they're trying to hide. And the Almighty's like, what are you guys doing? Like, why are you hiding? They say, oh, we're naked. Oh, how'd you know you're naked? And then they figure out what's going on. So it's interesting because we learn really, and this is again, like Joanne was asking, we can play the great what ifs of Jewish history of what would have happened if this wasn't the case. But we see what Adam's response is when the Almighty asks him what happened. This is verse 12 in chapter 3 in Genesis. It says, V'yomer Adam, ha'isha asher nesata imadi, hi nesata li min ha'etz v'oichel. That woman that you gave me, it's her fault, right? It's her fault that she gave me the apple and I ate from it and I got, apple, right? She gave me the fruit and I ate from it and I got in trouble. Now I'm in trouble. And what happens next? V'yomer Hashem Elokim li'isha. So God speaks to Chava and says, Mazos asisa, what happened here? And she says, the serpent tricked me up and I ate. One of the great what ifs of Jewish history is what would have happened if Adam took the approach of King David, right? And actually, sages say that there's the concept of Gilgul, of reincarnation, that David was actually a reincarnation of Adam. And we see that he learned this lesson because Adam messed up a lot in his life. King David messed up a lot in his life, and we'll see this in several sessions down the road when we get to the life and times of King David, but he definitely did a lot of things wrong, right? But the one thing that we see from the book of Samuel is that every time he did something wrong, he never shirked responsibility for his wrong actions. He admitted it when he was called out by it, by Nasan Hanavi, by Nathan the prophet, or whoever. He said, Chatasi, I sinned. And he does that numerous times. And therefore, we learn from King David that's why King David is essentially the perfect leader, because he's not perfect, but he accepts his shortcomings and he doesn't just try and, like all our leaders nowadays, every time they do something wrong, they lie until they can't lie anymore. King David right away said, Chatasi, I sinned. Adam, we see, didn't do that. He's caught red-handed. What happens? It's that woman you gave me. God turns to the woman and says, it's that serpent you put in here. Right? Everyone's passing the blame. Not my fault. It's not my fault that I did this wrong. I didn't do anything. It's my life circumstances. It's the house I was born into. It's the family I was brought up in. It's the school that I went to. It's the job that I have. It's the person that I married. It's the friends that I hang around with. It's all their fault of the way I am. It's nothing to do with me. And our sages actually tell this story in an amazing way of a man named Rebbe Elazar ben Dudaya, who the Talmud says is Rebbe, which is the term for one of the great rabbis of the Mishnah, and then goes on to describe the beginnings of his life as one of the most debased characters ever to live on the planet, that his life mission was to visit every single harlot he could find in the world. And finally, one day he's with a certain harlot and he gets a certain inspiration that he has to change his life, and he goes and tries to correct his ways. And he goes through, the Talmud describes the whole situation where he goes outside and he says, Shemayim v'aretz bikshu lai rachamim, heavens and earth, ask mercy for me. And they said, sorry, we got our own problems. And he says, Harim v'gavos bikshu lai rachamim, mountains and hills, please ask mercy for me. They say, sorry, we have our own problems. And he goes on, and then he finally comes to the point where he says, Ein hadavar toli ella bi. So the great Kabbalist Sifsei Chaim explains what's going on over here. He's trying to do exactly what Adam and Eve did. He's trying to say, Shemayim and Aretz, heaven and earth, it's my surroundings' fault. It's my surroundings' fault that I'm like this. And the surroundings said, no, it's your fault. And Harim Vigavos, mountains and hills, it's my parents, it's my teachers, it's their fault that I'm this way. No, it's your fault. And he goes through all these different influences. And in the end, he comes to the conclusion of Ein Hadavar Toli Ella Bi, that the whole entire thing depends on me. And the Talmud goes on to describe that he cried and cried and cried until his soul left his body. And the Talmud says, Yesh kana olam b'sha'achas, that he earned his place in the world to come, and that one final great act. But be it as it may, that's a lesson that Adam and Eve didn't get, right? Because they are throwing the blame everywhere but themselves, not taking responsibility for their actions. And because of not only what they did, but because of their response, they're punished. And the punishment is that Adam has the punishment of b'zeah pecha tochel lechem, which means that he, by the sweat of his brow, he will eat, because in the garden and that existence, complete perfect loaves of healthy bread grew on the trees and everything was ready, and you didn't have to do anything. You just didn't even have to take it out of the freezer and put it in the microwave. You just, the food was all there for them, ready to go. Now the punishment was, no, now you got to work the land. You got to work the land and you got to earn a living, and it ain't gonna be easy anymore. That's a punishment for man. What's the punishment for Eve, for Chava, for woman, for womankind? So if we look back at breaking up the different hours of the day, we see that above in the outline, it said that in the 8th hour, they arose to the bed 2 and descended 4. Because in the original creation of Adam and Chava, of Adam and Eve, the whole procreation process was an instantaneous act. In other words, the Adam and Eve were together, and she conceived and had 2 kids, right? Or had 4 kids. We'll go see how many kids she had in a minute. But it all happened right there. It was not, there was no 9 months of pregnancy. There was no first trimester. There was no morning sickness. There was no binges of ice cream and broccoli in the middle of the night. There was ice cream and pickles in the middle of the night. There were no OBGYN visits. There were no ultrasounds. There was no birth pangs. There was no C-sections. There was none of that. None of that existed. They were together and they had a kid, right? It happened in a very quick process. And that was the original, so to speak, plan for the world. But Chava's punishment, Eve's punishment, was that now she would basically be a woman as we know it, right? That in the physiology of a woman, that was her punishment, so to speak. That she would now that conception might have its challenges, and gestation would have its challenges, and birth would have its challenges, and that was the punishment for Chava. Now, what's the punishment for our serpent? That he became the serpent as we know it. So we went back to that idea of looking like a fairy tale. That's only because we're looking at it with our eyes, right? At the beginning of the story, he's very much like a human. He ends up like we know him today, right? Slithering on the ground, no legs, no arms, can't communicate. The lowest of animals went from being the highest of animals to being the lowest of animals. That's his punishment. Now you'll notice nowhere in the punishment does it say that they are ejected from the garden, because we can really learn from the fact they were ejected from the garden, really a reality that the Almighty, so to speak, doesn't punish out of a sense of vengeance for us. Whenever we experience, let's talk about just in a Tanakh sense, in a biblical sense, when we see stories of divine retribution, right? That's, from a Jewish sense, that is always meant to correct mankind. It's always there to serve a purpose to try and get mankind back onto the straight and narrow. It's wake-up calls. It's learning moments. That's the purpose of any quote unquote divine punishments. So Adam having to go work the field, that was a net result of his actions, right? Therefore, this is what he needed for his wake-up call and to get back to where he had fallen. Eve becoming a woman as we know it, that was a wake-up call. The serpent, that was a wake-up call. But there's another result of the situation, and that was they could no longer be in the Garden of Eden. Why? Because there was seemingly another tree that was known as the Eitz Chaim, the tree of life. And this tree, if they would eat from this tree, now, by the way, we understand this tree to be the trees that gave off food in the garden, right? That the fruit was of such a form that if they had eaten the fruit from the tree of life, they would have lived forever. In other words, the actualization or the synthesis of the Garden of Eden with the earth would have taken place, and mankind would have never needed to die, or physically would not have died. And Rav Chaim Volozhin explains that once we saw that mankind was going to be on a roller coaster for their history, that there were going to be ups and downs, and there was going to be a lot of cleanup acts that needed to be done. Because let's face it, we're not all perfect. And as much as we try, and as much as we, every time we pray, we have really 2 places in our Amidah. We have 2 different prayers where we ask for forgiveness, and we have one where we ask for forgiveness, one where we ask to be brought back to our closest to the Almighty, and then we have Yom Kippur, which is the big day of atonement, and then we have all the different fasts. We got a lot of chances to try and clean up our acts as Jews. But be it as it may, when many of us will take leave of this world, we won't have a completely perfect slate. And therefore, our souls will go back to our Creator slightly tarnished. And there's a process that our souls go through to be cleansed again and reconnected with the Almighty. That in Hebrew we refer to as Gehenna. In English is often translated as hell or purgatory. It's probably more like a purgatory than a hell. And it's a cleansing process that we go through. By the way, for anyone who's ever heard of this, I don't know, somewhat well-known custom of saying Kaddish for the 11 months after a parent passes away, this is where it comes from. Because we say that maximum sentence in Gehenna for a person is 12 months. Whatever that means, because again, they're in the spiritual realm, we're in the physical realm, but 12 months. And we say that there's no way our parents are completely evil and needed all 12 months. So we do actions to try and speed up their time in Gehenna for 11 months. And that's where saying Kaddish and doing other things comes from. That's exactly where it comes from. So, but another part of that process is the decomposing of the body, that whatever the torment of the soul-body connection, there's a tremendous torment caused to the soul when it, so to speak, has to witness the body decomposing in the ground. And that also is a part of the cleansing process and helps to speed up the time in Gehenna. So death and decomposition, that is a big part of the process. So says Reb Chaim Volozhin, they couldn't stay in the Garden of Eden. Once we knew that they were going to transgress, therefore they were going to have to do tshuva. They're going to have to try and repair their relationship with the Almighty. Not everyone would do it completely in their lifetime. So therefore the need to die and decompose was going to be necessary in order for us to be able to send our souls, so to speak, back to our Creator and the form that's supposed to be. By the way, this reminds me of, that Beethoven, after he passed away, was sitting in his chambers erasing all of his great works. And somebody went in there and said, Beethoven, what are you doing? And he said, I'm decomposing. But I'm ching. Okay, talk about bad jokes. All the bad jokes tonight come right from Rabbi Landis. So, but it was a practical, and that's really how we can understand all punishments. They're practical. We don't always understand the practicality of them, but they are always practical. And therefore, the need to be expelled from the garden was practical, that we needed, therefore, mankind could not live forever. Mankind was going to need to die. And according to the Kabbalists, mankind's time was limited to 1,000 years at that point. Okay? Now, Maimonides, the great rationalist, says that today, or he was writing in the 13th century, but today, if we would eat a healthy diet, all whole foods and whole grains, none of this processed stuff, and eat the right thing and live a healthy lifestyle and all that, says the Rambam, we could also live to be 1,000 years, but none of us live a truly healthy life, so we can't do it. Okay, it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but be it as it may, we see that at this point, lifespan is limited to 1,000 years, and now the reality of man outside of the garden takes place. Okay, I want to delve into at least one more complicated question, and then we'll touch a little bit on Cain and Able, on Cain and Hevel. So first of all, where in the world are we talking about? Right, we keep talking about this place, the Garden of Eden, or the garden that is outside of Eden, or something like that. Where in the world are we even talking about? So the Torah does give us a geographical location, or at least geographical points for where exactly this place is. The Torah says, and this is quoting from, again, the story, it's the second chapter of Genesis. It says, V'nar Yotze Me'eden, that there were rivers that went out from Eden, Lahashkos Esagan, to water the garden. So again, that's what we understand, that whatever Eden was separate than the garden. And there are rivers that go out from Eden, and it watered the garden. And and from there, from this garden, they split out, and they have 4 different heads. So Shem Echad Pishon, Huasovives Kol Haaretz. So there's one that we refer to as the Pishon, and that goes through the whole land of Achilya, and Asher Sham Zahav, that is a place where you find gold. The Zavar Tov, okay, fine. V'shem HaNahar Hasheni Gichon, and the name of the second river is Gichon, whoso eskal arts Kush, and that surrounds the whole area of Kush. We'll figure out where that is in a minute. V'shem HaNahar Shlishis, and the name of the third river Chidekel, Kidmas Asher Ashur, and that goes all around the land of Assyria or Ashur. And Vahanar Harvi Hu Paras, and the third river is the river of Paras. So Paras, so the last two are easy, right? The last two are pretty clear on what those are. That's what we call the Tigris and Euphrates. So what we say here is the in Hebrew is the Chidekel. That would be the Tigris. And the Paras is the Euphrates. Now, the big question that pops up is, what are these other two? What is the Pishon and what is the Gichon? So I have a nice map here that shows some of the different opinions, because like anything Jewish, there's never one unified opinion as to what we're talking about, and this is no exception. So let me just bring up this map here for y'all to see. Okay, this is our map, and this over here, this is the land of Israel right up here. Let me get my drawing thingy. 1 second here. Yeah, inundate the drawing thing. Here we go. Right. So here we have the land of Israel up here. And according to one opinion, which is the opinion of Josephus, this is the Pishon over here, because he understands that Chavila is India. That's what Josephus writes. But that is not the predominant opinion. Most are of the opinion that Chavila is actually over here, is like this part of just south of Egypt, this part of Africa, and that therefore this would be the Pishon, or what we call the White Nile or the main Nile. And Kush is probably Ethiopia, which would be down here, and therefore this is the Gichon over here. So again, we got Josephus over here. And there are others who do agree with Josephus, but I don't think that's the predominant opinion. But that's Josephus, not the president, in case you didn't know who I was talking about there. But probably the most predominant opinions that we're talking about over here. So therefore, that means we have our Tigris over here, our Euphrates over here, both in modern day Iraq, and coming out of the Persian Gulf over here. This is where they are, and then we have the Pishon, which would be up here, and the Gichon, which would be down here. Now the problem is these four rivers don't converge, right? That the Torah tells us that if you could find where these four rivers converge, there you would find the Garden of Eden. So what is it? Is it somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea? Is it somewhere in the Red Sea? Is it somewhere in the Persian Gulf? It doesn't seem to be anywhere by the way we look at it. And therefore, there's a lot of different takes on what we can understand from this. One opinion is that next week, when we talk about the Great Deluge, that the whole physicality of the world changed, and therefore that there actually there was a place where these rivers met, and they're now submerged underground, and we don't know where they are, and that's where the Garden of Eden is. There's another opinion that at this time, when Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, the Almighty submerged, so to speak, at this point, and the Garden of Eden was not able to be physically visited on Earth anymore. There are some opinions that one of the Kabbalistic opinion is that the garden was 32 degrees south of Jerusalem. There's certain Kabbalistic understanding into why that is, and even according to some opinions, it might have been Jerusalem itself. Because one thing that actually I failed to mention last week is that the so to speak, holiest spot on earth is where the Beis Hamikdash, where the temple stood. And the holiest spot of the temple was the Kadshei Kadashim, the Holy of Holies. And what is in the Holy of Holies? There was something there called the Even Shisia, which means the foundation stone. And according to, again, homiletic literature, that is the point where the world was created from. In other words, that's where Big Bang happened, if you want to use some of our terminology from last week. And so along these lines, you could say that mankind, we know mankind was created in Mesopotamia, the Levant, the Fertile Crescent, that area. So just throw in Jerusalem with the foundation stone. There are those who want to say that as well, but not just as a speculation. It's based on the second river, the Gichon, that many think that the Gichon is similar to the spring, the Gichon spring in Jerusalem, which is the one spring that waters the whole city. Those used to water the temple, and that's what they want to base themselves on. Be it as it may, we don't really know. Can't visit there today. But in a more philosophical sense, what the Garden of Eden was was a synthesis of the physical and the spiritual. That ideally, when the Almighty, so to speak, created the world, he wanted the physical and the spiritual to be synthesized into one. In other words, for our souls to lead the way, for our desire to do good and to be good to lead the way. And that would have given us this spiritual existence known as the Garden at Eden, the Garden from Eden, the Garden of Eden, whatever everyone want to call it, but that's what it was. So it's in many ways, again, if I've never experienced this, I can't really explain to you better than I'm doing right now, but it was the synthesis of the physical and the spiritual. When Adam and Chava screw up, the physical and spiritual are separated, and now there's what we call a physical world and a spiritual world. And this is why a lot of times when we refer to the next world, or the world of the souls, or heaven, or the place where people go when they die, we refer to it as the Garden of Eden, because basically it's the spiritual half of the Garden of Eden. The physical half is still here on earth. The spiritual half is in the spiritual realm. And therefore we say that that's where people go when they pass away. And when we talk about the Messianic era and the, our desire to bring the world back to perfection, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to resynthesize the physical and the spiritual. We're trying to bring the Garden of Eden-like existence back here on earth. And that is really our goal as mankind. And that was Adam's job. And even when Adam is kicked out of the garden, his job is to resynthesize the physical and the spiritual. But we're going to see that doesn't go so well, right? Adam is just not the guy, right? It's he's just not the guy, because we're going to see, first of all, in trying to convey the lesson to his children, he does a pretty lousy job, because one of the first interactions, or really the first interaction we're told about, is that each one tries to bring offerings to the Almighty. One gets jealous of the other, and Cain, the one who brought the not so great offering, gets jealous of Hevel, of Abel, who brought the more able offering, and he retaliates from his jealousy, or his jealousy drives him to actually kill his brother. Now, there's a whole debate as to what drove this fight. Was it really that Cain was jealous of Abel's offering being accepted? And our sages give multiple answers. One is that they were having a fight over who they would marry. Now the question is, who did they marry, right? So our sages tell us that all the children, and quite possibly the whole first generation of people, were all born with twins. So every time we're told one was born, there were really multiple births, and therefore Cain and Hevel married sisters. They married their sisters, right? Which begs the question, why would the Almighty have created the world in a way that there was incest to be able to procreate the world? And one of the answers is that we have the concept, really the philosophical concept we take out of this whole story, and that is that the whole entire world came from one person. Because our sages say that each person is a world unto themselves, that every single one of us is a world. And therefore, when we talk about the creation of mankind, we see that mankind all started as one single human being and sprout out until the 8 billion people we have in the world today. That's to tell us that that's the potential that each and every single one of us have. We all have that potential to build worlds. That's what's in each and every single one of us. And the Talmud tells us along these lines, Chayav Adam Lomar, that a person is obligated to say, Bishvi li nivra ha'olam, that for me the world was created, because we're just like Adam. We're just like our great-great-great-grandfather Adam, and a world was created for him, so therefore a world is created for us. And that's the philosophical lesson that comes out of these hard to understand stories. So one opinion is that they fought over who they're going to marry. Another opinion is that they fought over who was going to control Mount Moriah, where the temple would eventually be built. One was that just other ownership of who would own which part of the world. One was who would get more reward in the world to come. And really, here's my favorite approach. I heard this once from Rabbi Frand, who spoke at our dinner a few years ago, that if you look at the fight right before the fight between Cain and Hevel, between Cain and Abel, it says V'yomer Cain el Hevel. It says that Cain said to Abel, and then it goes on to describe that he beats the daylights out of him and he kills him. What did he say to him? Right? It's a big cliffhanger there. Cain said to Abel, boom, 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 and he kills the guy, right? What did he say already? So says Rabbi Frand that this is really the history of mankind, that so often people are set off by words, right? People are set off by stupidity, by nothing. And let's face it, you just look at history, as we're going to talk about. There's been world wars that are literally been set off by words. I mean, just look at World War I. World War I was one big family feud, right? That's all it was. You talk about, oh no, World War I was caused by the Archduke Ferdinand being assassinated. Yeah, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. The flicker that lit the tinder, right? That was what set it off. But the problems were all the words being said, all the alliances and all that. That's what it really was all about. And therefore, we learned that lesson. That's how it's been since time immemorial, because it doesn't matter what Cain said to Hevel. It doesn't matter, because so often these fights that are cataclysmic are based on nothing short of stupidity. And therefore, that's one of the lessons we can take out from Cain and Hevel, that we don't even know what they said to. We don't even know what caused the fight. All we know is that some words were spoken, and so often that's all that it takes. Okay, so after Adam and Chava, Cain and Able, Cain and Hevel, there is another son named Shais that is the one that we all descend from. The Semitic people are all descendants from Shais, from Seth, and that is the line that we follow. But we're going to see no one really does that great of a job of bringing the world back to where it needs to be. Now, there are going to be candidates along the way, but many of those candidates are going to fail pretty miserably. So the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us that there are 10 generations separating Adam and Noah. To tell us the patience that the Almighty really had with mankind. Because really every generation upset the Almighty, right? Every generation fell. All these 10 generations fell far short of where they needed to be. But still, Hashem, the Almighty, gave us 10 generations of chances before the flood was brought into the world, and that's where we'll pick up next week. And we'll just wrap up now with you guys. But I do, if anyone who signs off before you finish the questions, I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you for participating, and be sure to tune in Sunday, 6:30 p.m. for our 33-hour campaign. Going to support us for the whole year in a matter of 33 hours. And the link, we'll post it here again in the chat. And now the floor is yours for anyone who has questions. So we have one here in the chat box. It says, did Adam get blood before or after the sin? He was a complete human being before he transgressed. So we have that before we have him interacting at all, he is a complete, perfect human being, so to speak. So yes, he had blood, he had everything we have. The only seeming difference was there were certain physical differences that the Midrashim talk about, but the main difference is that his the evil inclination, the drive to not be spiritual, was an external struggle as opposed to an internal struggle, whatever that means. Okay. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for coming. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and chime in if you have anything to add, or any questions or comments or concerns or good jokes, bad jokes, anything. Okay. So with no further ado, I will, so Dan has a question about Chanoch. Right, Chanoch. Well, there's actually two Chanochs, but we have one son who was the one of these sons of Seth. Bring out my Chumash here to make sure I'm giving you the right information. I think I gave you the wrong information because I think he's the son of Cain. Hold on. Here we go. No, Seth's son, right? Chanoch. Yeah. So what's your question? Why do you merit going up to heaven and not left to help the rest of mankind? Yeah, good question. This is this is just one of those midrashim that tells us that Chanoch died young because he was taken, so to speak, before he could or would transgress for the rest of mankind, and therefore he went up to heaven, so to speak, whole. In other words, before he transgressed at all. Don't have a good understanding of that. I'll have to put my research committee on it to see if I can give you something more meaningful in that. Okay. Anything else before we wrap it up? Okay. Well, so with no further ado, I'll bid you all adieu and wish you all a wonderful week. And I'll look forward to seeing you all Sunday. Be well all.